morning. This is Mission Control Houston on Friday, April 19th, 2019. We're here in the International Space Station Flight Control Room where teams are monitoring the approach of Northrop Grumman Cygnus cargo vehicle to the International Space Station. Cygnus is about to pass through the approach ellipsoid, which is about 1 kilometer away from the International Space Station. Judd Freeling is the flight director today. He'll be leading the teams here in Mission Control. He'll also be communicating and working hand in hand with the Northrop Grumman teams in Dulles, Virginia. To his right is Neil Nagata, the Capcom today. You're going to hear his voice this morning as he speaks to the crew aboard the International Space Station. He'll be filtering information from the teams here in Mission Control up to the astronauts aboard the station. Visiting Vehicle Officer Tom Castleberry will be communicating directly with Northrop Grumman's flight controllers in Dulles, Virginia, relaying vehicle status and updates back to teams here in Mission Control Houston. And Northrop Grumman Mission Director Paul Brower is monitoring the teams and controllers in the Cygnus Flight Control Room in Dulles, Virginia.
Yes. Good morning, Margarita. Go ahead.
We just heard confirmation a little while ago from Capcom Neil Nagata confirming that Cygnus has crossed through that approach ellipsoid, which is one of the many milestones built into Cygnus approach this morning, as it carries about 7,600 pounds of cargo to the International Space Station.
Good morning. Good morning, Oleg and Alexei. This is Margarita for the morning IMS tag-up.
You can hear the crew right now reporting that they have a visual on the vehicle. Cygnus is now approaching what's called the 250-meter hold point. This is one of the hold points just outside something known as the keep-out sphere and one of the milestones designed into Cygnus approach. Once Cygnus reaches that 250-meter hold, teams will run a series of checks to make sure Cygnus systems are performing as expected and conduct a go, no-go before Cygnus departs that 250-meter hold for the next milestone, which comes when it's just 30 meters away from the station. That'll be the last milestone to make sure all the systems are a go before Cygnus proceeds to that capture point about 10 to 12 meters from the space station. The view we're getting right now is a view from what's called the Cuckoo workstation. It's a workstation on board the International Space Station, and this is the view from a camera pointing toward that workstation. This is the telemetry data that's being fed to the International Space Station now. McClain and David Saint-Jacques are viewing this now and monitoring the approach before they go into the cupola and work from the controls of the station's robotic arm. When Cygnus arrives to that capture point this morning, NASA astronaut McClain will capture the spacecraft with the station's robotic arm backed up by David Saint-Jacques of the Canadian Space Agency. Following that, the controls of the robotic arm will be handed over to ground officers here on the ground, who will then bring Cygnus closer to the station for berthing later this morning. This cargo resupply mission started about 2 days ago when Cygnus launched aboard the Antares rocket Wednesday, April 17th at 3:46 p.m. Central from Pad 0A at NASA's Wallops Flight Facility in Virginia. At the time of launch, the space station was flying over the Atlantic northeast of the Lesser Antilles, about 254 statute miles above the Earth. It was a smooth ride uphill for the two-stage Antares rocket, taking only 9 minutes and 9 seconds to deliver Cygnus to its initial orbit around the Earth. About 2.5 hours later, solar arrays were deployed as Cygnus continued its journey to the International Space Station. To get there, it gradually raised its orbit around the Earth using specially timed firings of its engines to eventually reach the same altitude as the space station, roughly 250 miles above the ground. We're in a short handover period right now, which will occur from time to time. The data and communications, including some of the visuals from the International Space Station, come through a series of satellites called TDRS satellites, which are tracking data and relay satellite systems. And we're getting a good view of Cygnus right now as it's flying over China, about 256 statute miles above the Earth. Again, we're waiting for Cygnus to reach that 250-meter hold point, which is one of the milestones designed into Cygnus approach. Right now, Cygnus is sitting at just under 500 meters away from the International Space Station. On this mission, Northrop Grumman used a new load capability. Previously, all cargo had to be loaded around 4 days prior to launch, but this new capability allows time-sensitive science experiments to be loaded into Cygnus just 24 hours before liftoff. This resupply mission is delivering about 7,600 pounds of science, research, crew supplies, and vehicle hardware to the International Space Station this morning, making it the heaviest Antares Cygnus cargo load to date. Of that 7,600 pounds of cargo is about 3,500 pounds of science investigations. One of those investigations is NASA's next generation of free-flying robots aboard the station. Astrobee is the self-contained cube-shaped robot designed to help scientists and engineers develop and test technologies for use in microgravity. Astrobe will assist astronauts with routine chores and give ground controllers additional eyes and ears on the space station. The robots are actually powered by fans and vision-based navigation and can accommodate up to 3 investigations. Science investigations like Astrobe have the potential to free up astronauts to conduct more research aboard the International Space Station. The station is currently flying over China, about 255 statute miles above the Earth. There are currently 6 crew members aboard the station, with the most recent crew arriving in March. Currently on board the station from the left, astronauts David Saint-Jacques of the Canadian Space Agency and Anne McClain of NASA, cosmonauts Oleg Kononenko and Alexei Ovchinin of Roscosmos, and NASA astronauts Nick Hague and Christina Koch. Expedition 59 kicked off when Nick Hague, Christina Koch, and Alexei Ovchinin arrived to the International Space Station in mid-March, where they were greeted by NASA astronaut Anne McClain, David Saint-Jacques, and Oleg Kononenko. Once again, we're watching as Cygnus approaches the 250-meter hold point on its way to the International Space Station. The range and rate we're getting right now is decreasing as expected when approaching that hold point. Once we reach that hold point at 250 meters, Cygnus will maintain that distance as teams run a series of checks before departing again to the next milestone. The crew will use the station's robotic arm to take hold of Cygnus, and after capture, ground controllers will command the station's robotic arm to rotate and install it on the Earth-facing side of the station's Unity module. Cygnus will spend about 3 months attached to the space station and will then depart for an extended mission before it disposes of several tons of trash from the space station during a fiery re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere. When Cygnus arrives to the space station this morning, Expedition 59 flight engineer Anne McClain will capture the spacecraft, backed up by David Saint-Jacques. Saint-Jacques will essentially be a second set of eyes and ears to support McClain and will handle the bulk of the voice communication back and forth with the Capcom here in Houston. Each Cygnus spacecraft is named after influential individuals in the world of spaceflight, and the Cygnus spacecraft for this space station resupply mission is dedicated to SS Roger Chaffee. Chaffee and his crewmates Gus Grissom and Ed White lost their lives on January 27, 1967 in the Apollo 1 fire on the launch pad at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Chaffee was part of the third group of astronauts selected by NASA in October 1963. Again, we're watching as Cygnus approaches the 250-meter hold point on its way to the International Space Station this morning. Cygnus is currently flying over the Pacific Ocean at 254 statute miles above the Earth. As Cygnus continues its journey to the International Space Station, we're still on track for an on-time capture around 4:30 a.m. Central Time this morning. Cygnus is delivering about 7,600 pounds of supplies and payloads, including critical materials, to directly support dozens of more than 250 science and research investigations that will occur during the space station's expeditions 59 and 60. Of that 7,600 pounds of cargo is 3,500 pounds of science investigations. One of those science investigations includes rodent research. This was actually the first flight for rodent research to be flown on a Cygnus spacecraft. Spaceflight is known to have a dramatic influence on immune response, but there's little research on the effect following an actual challenge to the body's immune system. Using a mouse model makes this possible, as the mouse's immune system closely parallels to that of humans. The rodents were able to fly on board the Cygnus resupply craft using that late load capability I mentioned earlier. Previously, all cargo had to be loaded around 4 days prior to launch, but this new capability allows time-sensitive science experiments like the rodents to be loaded into Cygnus just 24 hours before liftoff. Cygnus is now sitting just under 280 meters away from the space station. Again, we're waiting as Cygnus approaches toward that 250-meter hold point. Again, we're waiting for Cygnus to reach that 250-meter hold point. Once Cygnus reaches that hold, we'll hear confirmation that Cygnus is holding steady. Cygnus is now just under 270 meters away from the station now. Cygnus is now just under 260 meters away from the International Space Station as it approaches that 250-meter hold point. We'll start seeing views of Cygnus get a little bit darker as it crosses into an orbital nighttime. Cygnus is now sitting at 254 meters away from the International Space Station right now as it approaches that 250-meter hold. Cygnus is now 2 meters away from that 250-meter hold point.
Station Houston on Space to Ground 2 confirms Cygnus 250-meter hold for Step 2 in 1.102.
And copy from the cupola. The ECS Cygnus command panel LED status matches what's the expectation. We have abort armed only. The frame counter is incrementing. Prime range is 250 and stable. And corridor Bravo, we have light within the corridor. The vehicle size does match the outline. The light on monitor 1 is offset port by about 5 vehicle width and half a vehicle forward. On monitor 3, by about half a vehicle width port, that's for starboard, and centered lengthwise. Circle offset from corridor center, and for both camera views, the circle is centered.
Okay, copy that, station. That's a good report.
One go back just for precision. So the report on the lights, the abort arm light is on, but the abort is not armed.
Okay, copy.
As you just heard, that was Neil Nagata, the Capcom here in the International Space Station Mission Control Center, calling up to Anne McClain and David Saint-Jacques, confirming that Cygnus is now holding steady at 250 meters. And that was David Saint-Jacques, who you heard after that, confirming a good readout from the Capcom. The next milestone after the 250-meter hold is when Cygnus crosses the keep-out sphere, which is an imaginary sphere around the space station. With a radius of 200 meters, the keep-out sphere functions as a protective gate around the station, and visiting spacecraft like Cygnus have to get the go-ahead to move inside that keep-out sphere until teams have the chance to make sure everything is functioning on the spacecraft. After crossing that keep-out sphere, Cygnus will start approaching the 30-meter hold arrival. That'll be the last milestone to make sure all the systems are a go before Cygnus gets about 10 to 12 meters from the space station. Again, we're in a short handover period right now, which will occur from time to time. The data and communications, including some of the visuals from the International Space Station, come through a series of satellites called TDRS satellites, which are tracking, data, and relay satellite systems. Again, Cygnus is still holding at that 250-meter hold point as teams here in Houston run a series of go, no-goes before Cygnus is able to depart from that 250-meter hold to the next milestone. Again, this is a view of what's called the Cuckoo workstation. It's a workstation on board the International Space Station, and this is a view from a camera pointing toward that workstation, and this is the telemetry data that's being fed to the International Space Station.
Station Houston on Space to Ground 2, Cygnus and ISS are configured for approach inside the keep-out sphere. Expect approach to resume shortly and stand by for the Cygnus PCS command checkout.
Copies.
And you just heard Capcom Neil Nagata confirm teams here on the ground are ready for Cygnus to depart that 250-meter hold, and confirmation of a good readout from David Saint-Jacques aboard the International Space Station.
Station Houston on 2, Cygnus has resumed approach. You are go for Cygnus PCS command checkout. Hold arm per step 3 in 1.102.
Copy. Step 3 in work. Houston Station from the cupola. Hold command armed.
Station, hold arm is confirmed. You are go for Cygnus PCS command checkout disarm per step 4 in 1.102.
Step 4 in work. In Houston, hold command disarmed.
In Houston, copies. The Cygnus PCS command checkout was successful. Begin monitoring approach from 250 meters per step 5 in 1.102.
Step 5 in work.
We have confirmation that Cygnus has left the hold, heading toward that next milestone, the 30-meter hold point, just after crossing the keep-out sphere. Anne McClain and David Saint-Jacques are working on the Canadarm now, preparing for capture. We're now just under 230 meters away from the International Space Station.
Station Houston on Spacer Ground 2. Cygnus is inside the 200-meter keep-out sphere. Crew now has the authority to issue an abort if no comm with MCCH and the light is outside of the corridor.
And station copies. Any ready for Bravo report?
We'll take it.
On both monitors, light is within the corridor. Vehicle size difficult to assess at night. Light offset on monitor 1, still about 5 vehicle width to port, and half vehicle width forward. On monitor 3, about half a vehicle width to port. Correction, starboard on monitor 3, the offset.
Okay, Houston copies. That's a good report.
And the circle is about 1 vehicle port on monitor 1.
Okay, we copy.
Just to recap so far, Cygnus arrived to the 250-meter hold point, crossed the keep-out sphere, which enables the crew to issue an abort if necessary, and is now headed to that next milestone, which is the 30-meter hold point. Cygnus is now about 137 meters away from the International Space Station. Cygnus is carrying about 7,600 pounds of cargo to the International Space Station today. And to break that down even more, Cygnus is carrying about 2,000 pounds of crew supplies, 1,400 pounds of vehicle hardware, 3,500 pounds of science investigations, and 53 pounds of spacewalk equipment. So far, there have been 3 spacewalks this year. March 22nd, NASA astronauts Anne McClain and Nick Hague conducted their career first spacewalks. Hague and McClain successfully replaced nickel-hydrogen batteries with newer, more powerful lithium-ion batteries for the power channel on one pair of the station's solar arrays. These new batteries will provide an improved power capacity for operations with a lighter mass and a smaller volume than the nickel-hydrogen batteries did. And March 29th, Hague and Christina Cook successfully upgraded the station's power storage capacity during their 6-hour and 45-minute spacewalk. And most recently, on April 8th, Anne McClain and David Saint-Jacques successfully established a redundant path of power to the Canadarm2, which will be used to capture Cygnus this morning, with McClain at the controls backed up by Saint-Jacques.
Houston, station on 2 for WSTFL.
And we're with you on 2.
Neil, just want to let you guys know I'm ready for that activity whenever you are.
Okay, copy that, Christina. You are go, and the target is 62%.
Copy 62 and a go. Thank you.
Aside from equipment and hardware traveling to the space station today, there's also fresh food on board for the crew. Cygnus is carrying a variety of food today, including smoked turkey, pork chops, shrimp cocktail, and even some desserts like cherry cobbler, chocolate pudding, and lemon cake. The vast majority of the food aboard the station has been specially prepared to last months, either through dehydration or thermos stabilization. Because of that, visiting cargo missions like these are a real treat to expedition crews, giving them a chance to get fresh food and other treats from teams, friends, and family on the ground. Overall, Cygnus is launching the equivalent of more than 800 meals on this mission. Again, Cygnus is in an orbital nighttime right now. That's why these views look dark. Cygnus is currently flying over the Pacific Ocean, around 264 statute miles above the Earth. Another view from the Cuckoo workstation right now, and Cygnus is now under 100 meters from the International Space Station. Again, we are standing by as Cygnus is approaching that next milestone of the 30-meter hold point. Once Cygnus arrives to the 30-meter hold point, mission control teams in Dulles will perform a state of health checks on the Cygnus vehicle. This 30-meter hold point is basically the stopping point to verify everything is in the green and looks good before it makes the final approach to the International Space Station for capture. And here's a view of Northrop Grumman's Mission Control Center in Dulles, Virginia. That robotic arm that's being used to capture Cygnus today, with NASA astronaut Anne McClain at the controls, backed up by David Saint-Jacques of the Canadian Space Agency, is part of Canada's contribution to the International Space Station. It measures just under 58 feet long and was largely involved in the assembly of the International Space Station. Each end of the Canadarm2 features an identical hand, in a sense, known as the latching end effector. These pieces contain snares that tighten on special grapple fixtures to ensure a strong grip, just as our hands would to pick something up, allowing the robotic arm to grasp firmly when it is picking things up like we would. Once Cygnus is captured this morning, controls of the robotic arm will be handed over to robotics controllers on the ground to attach Cygnus to the station in a process known as berthing later this morning.
So light here within corridor on both vehicle size matches the outline. Light offset from circle on monitor 1, about now 3 with port. No change on monitor 3. And circle offset from corridor center, about half a width starboard on both monitors.
All right, copy that. Good report. Thanks.
Of that 7,600 pounds on its way to the International Space Station this morning is about 3,500 pounds of science investigations. One of those science investigations is the vascular aging investigation. Emerging data points toward a link among cardiovascular health risk, carotid artery aging, bone metabolism, and blood biomarkers, insulin resistance, and radiation. Data indicates that aging-like changes are accelerated in many International Space Station crew members, particularly with respect to their arteries. In this investigation, ultrasounds of arteries, blood samples, oral glucose tolerance, and wearable sensors from crew members will be analyzed. The results of this study could have great importance for assessing a newly identified risk for astronauts' cardiovascular health, potentially pointing to mechanisms to reduce risk. A good portion of research aboard the station is dedicated to understanding how the human body adapts and thrives in a microgravity environment. As we look to go farther, back to the moon and eventually on to Mars, it's vital that we know how to keep astronauts healthy and functional on longer and longer missions. That's why the space station is such a necessary platform. There's also a great deal of parallels between health challenges in space and different ailments back here on Earth, with some space-based treatments translating directly to help people still on the ground. And the Bioanalyzer is a Canadian Space Agency onboard instrument that serves as a platform for scientific experiments where astronauts can easily test different bodily fluids such as blood, saliva, and urine and get returned key biomedical analysis within a few hours. Scientists will be able to use the Bioanalyzer's data to accelerate science experiments. In the future, this type of device could help keep a closer eye on astronauts' health. These are just two of hundreds of experiments currently going on aboard the International Space Station. Research experiments like these are essential to support future deep space explorations for missions onto the Moon and Mars. Cygnus is coming up on less than 50 meters away from the International Space Station. Again, we are watching Cygnus right now as it's approaching that 30-meter hold point, which is the next milestone on Cygnus's journey to the International Space Station today.
Houston Station on 2 for WSTA Phil. I am switching to Rendezvous 1313.
Roger that.
Taking a live look at Cygnus as it approaches that 30-meter hold point, now right at 34 meters away from the International Space Station.
We still have one vehicle with port offset light from center.
Okay, copy that. Then that's a good report.
Cygnus is now 2 meters away from the 30-meter hold point.
Station Houston on Space to Ground 2, confirmed a 30-meter hold and set up for capture per step 6 in 1.102.
Copies, in work.
You just heard from Capcom Neil Nagata here in Mission Control Houston that Cygnus has arrived to the 30-meter hold point successfully. Again, teams are working now and running a series of checks to make sure everything looks good on the vehicle before its final approach to the station. Teams here will conduct a go, no-go poll before Cygnus is able to depart that 30-meter hold point.
Leave the lights on.
Roger that.
Again, as the series of checks continue at this 30-meter hold point, there will also be a go, no-go from the flight controllers here in Mission Control Houston, making sure everything on their end checks out, and then they'll be ready to move along to the next milestone. This is very important because the next milestone will be the arrival of Cygnus at the capture point about 10 to 12 meters from the International Space Station. Cygnus is still at that 30-meter hold point waiting to depart. You'll hear that from Capcom Neil Nagata here in Mission Control Houston today once we have confirmation that Cygnus is ready to go. Again, this is the last milestone before Cygnus arrives to the capture point about 10 to 12 meters away from the International Space Station.
And Station Houston on 2, Cygnus is ready to proceed to the capture point. Expect approach to resume shortly.
Copies.
Station Houston on 2, Cygnus has resumed the approach to the capture point. Monitor approach within 30 meters per step 7 in 1.102. The crew is primed to issue retreat if pry range is less than 6 meters.
Houston copies.
That was Capcom Neil Nagata here in Mission Control Houston confirming Cygnus departure from the 30-meter hold point. Cygnus is now headed to the capture point about 10 to 12 meters away from the International Space Station.
Houston for Bravo report on monitor 1.
You'll see views of Cygnus get a little bit brighter here as Cygnus heads into an orbital daytime. Cygnus is currently flying over the Atlantic Ocean, about 254 statute miles above the Earth.
A vehicle port, and the circle is offset from the center about half a vehicle starboard. And on monitor 3, things look pretty centered up.
Houston copies. Good report.
As the spacecraft closes in, we're starting to see the details on the vehicle, and those ultra-flex solar arrays on the back are gathering power and providing that power to Cygnus to perform some of these operations today. The view you're getting right now is actually from the Canadarm as Cygnus makes its final stretch to the International Space Station this morning. Once Cygnus is captured, there are several more steps to make sure Cygnus is ready to be berthed to the International Space Station later this morning. That robotic arm will capture Cygnus today at the controls of NASA astronaut Anne McClain, backed up by David Saint-Jacques of the Canadian Space Agency. Once Cygnus is captured this morning, controls of the robotic arm will be handed over to robotics controllers on the ground to attach Cygnus to the station for berthing. We're starting to see some different components of Cygnus as it comes into view. The top right and left of your screen are the ultraflex solar arrays on Cygnus coming into view right now. And that circle toward the bottom of Cygnus is where the Canadarm2 will be moving in today.
Station Houston on 2, confirm capture point and hold per step 8 and 1.102.
Copies.
Cygnus is hovering now just about 12 meters away from the International Space Station.
Houston, capture conditions confirmed. Crew is ready for Cygnus capture.
And stand by for capture.
Standing by.
Station Houston on 2, you are go for the Cygnus capture sequence. Step 4 and 1.110 Cygnus capture. Begin monitoring the backaway cue card.
We go for capture sequence in step 4 and work.
That was Capcom Neil Nagata confirming Cygnus is go for capture this morning. All of the milestones this morning are complete, now heading into our last step of the capture itself. The crew on board will be configuring the robotic arm. In just a few more minutes, we should start to see the robotic arm moving in closer to Cygnus for an on-time capture today. Once the Canadarm2 starts moving, there will be a series of readouts of the distance from the arm to the capture position over the pin. Then initial contact and capture, followed by the snares closing to ensure a good hold on Cygnus. And we have confirmation the arm is in motion. This is the final stretch for capture of Cygnus today. Cygnus is now in free drift, configured for capture. Two meters away. One meter away from capture. Over the pin. And we have confirmed capture at 4:28 a.m. Central as the International Space Station and Cygnus are flying over northeast France at 258 statute miles above the Earth. Now the snares inside the arm are beginning to retract, and we'll be able to see that slight motion here in a minute. This will ensure the arm has a tight hold on the spacecraft. We're in a short handover period right now between satellites, but just to recap so far, we have confirmed capture at 4:28 a.m. Central as the International Space Station and Cygnus were flying over northeast France at 258 statute miles above the Earth.
Station, Cygnus capture complete. Go for Cygnus post-capture reconfiguration.
Houston copies and in work.
And congratulations to all the ground teams who have been involved in the planning and execution of this NG-11 mission, which included the first late-load cargo to deliver time-sensitive science to the space station and the first shortened rendezvous for Cygnus. It's great to have the SS Roger Chaffee officially on board, and we look forward to working with the over 7,000 pounds of cargo for the next few months. The crew of Expedition 59 would also like to take a moment to recognize the family of Lieutenant Commander Roger Chaffee, an Apollo astronaut who made the ultimate sacrifice in the pursuit of human space exploration and after whom this vehicle is named. We never forget that we stand on the shoulders of giants. Please know that every day we remember his sacrifice and that we will continue to honor his legacy by pursuing his passion for exploration. To the SS Roger Chaffee, welcome aboard.
Houston copies and concurs with all, and that's well said. Congratulations to you, and that was some great flying in.
So once again, Cygnus began its journey to the International Space Station after lifting off from the Wallops Flight Facility in Virginia on top of an Antares rocket on Wednesday, April 17th at 3:46 p.m. Central Time. Cygnus made a two-day journey to be captured by McClain and David Saint-Jacques today at 4:28 a.m. Central Time, as the International Space Station and Cygnus were flying over northeast France at 258 statute miles above the Earth. The Cygnus spacecraft for the space station resupply mission was dedicated to SS Roger Chaffee, who lost his life in the Apollo 1 fire on the launch pad at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida, January 27, 1967. Now that capture is done, operations will be handed off to ground controllers who will command the robotic arm to slowly maneuver Cygnus to the correct position to be attached or berthed to the space station this morning. It'll be a very gradual process as flight controllers send commands to the station's arm, ultimately lining Cygnus up with the Earth-facing side of the Unity module, where it will be attached for about 3 months. We'll be back on air here shortly at 6 a.m. Central Time for berthing coverage, where the SS Roger Chaffee will be installed to the International Space Station before that 7,600 pounds of cargo can be unloaded. And that'll wrap up our coverage for a successful capture this morning. This is Mission Control Houston.